Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht is our resident specialist in debunking misinformation. He spends a good bit of his time parsing claims made by politicians and other government officials to verify their accuracy. His PolitiFact segments regularly appear on our airwaves and online, and he joins us today to break down the top fact checks of 2025 as we do every year. Paul, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Your
job is pretty busy, especially during big election years, but we didn't have any statewide elections this year. That doesn't mean you didn't have anything to do, right? What new trends did you see this year?
Of course. We always have things to fact check. We have the state legislature was here for what seemed like forever, making laws and talking about bills. And, of course, we had people reacting to those. We saw some interesting claims online this year about bills that had or had not passed on social media. Those gained a lot of traction. We also saw some of the same topics emerge that we did last year.
That's right. Immigration, disaster relief, those were big themes.
Exactly. Again. And people may remember Hurricane Helene hit western North Carolina in September of 2024. That was a big topic before that general election. And we saw that again this year as legislators passed laws, tried to lobby Congress to spend more money, and as politicians went out there and talked about what they saw. So that generated a lot of fact checks, a lot of content too, as we saw politicians go out there and talk about how the government was or was not working, and we reported on that. We even here at WRAL did a big documentary on how things were going out in western North Carolina.
And immigration, as we meant, especially with the recent enforcement push, right?
That's right. We saw Border Patrol come to North Carolina in November, and obviously that got a lot of people's attention because it's something that hadn't happened in the same way as it had in previous years. Obviously, immigration officials come to our state, but this time it was against the will of local officials in Charlotte and Raleigh, and they did it in ways that some Democrats in particular objected to. We fact-checked claims about why Border Patrol was here. We also fact-checked claims that people were putting out about the agents and what they were doing and whether or not they were jeopardizing public safety. And again, that will continue to be a big topic, immigration that is. As people talk about, how do you deal with the border? How do you deal with people who are here unauthorized and things like that? I expect those to be big topics again next year.
Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dig deep into the top fact checks of 2025 with WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht about the most popular North Carolina fact checks of 2025. Paul, before we dive deeper into the claims that you checked this year, let's talk about how you do what you do. Can you walk us through your process? What do you look for in claims, and how do you go about verifying them?
Right. So one way we come up with claims is by just seeing them out in the wild. We watch politicians speak all the time on our NC Capitol team. Sometimes we hear something that catches our ear. Sometimes people email us and say, hey, did you see that this was said by this official, this politician, or this is going around on social media? Now, as for claims that we fact check, a lot of the times we fact check things that have numbers in them or superlatives. This is the most or the worst or the best or the top or the, whatever, things like that get our attention. And then after we identify a claim, we use original documents to fact check, reliable sources like academic studies, government documents, other things like that to determine whether or not something is true or false. And then after I write up a report, it goes to editors who review it. And, if I've missed something, they point that out and say, oh, let's go back and take some more time with it and see what else we can find. But then once that whole process is done, 3 editors vote on a rating, and the rating is one of 6 things on our truthometer is what we call it. It can be true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, or pants on fire. That's a claim that's not only false but is sort of ridiculous, and the speaker should have known that it was false when they said it. So that's how we go about it. And we, again, one thing people may not know is this is not us just picking things that we see out in the world. Oftentimes we hear from politicians themselves who say, hey, did you hear that my political opponent said this? Staffers reach out to us and do that. That's something that goes on behind the scenes, and we take a look at those too.
I think one good example of the work that you do is a fact check you did on an effort to ban phones while driving. It not only got to sort of the root of whether or not it was true or not, it also helped you kind of show how misinformation can kind of spread, right?
Oh, man.
Tell us about that.
This is a great example of how fake news can enter the, the world of legitimate news. Here's what happened. It started on Facebook with an account that called itself North Carolina Legislature.
Now, this had nothing to do with the actual legislative website, right?
Some people didn't know that, Jack. Some people didn't know. It looked official. It had a picture of the Capitol, and a lot of their posts sounded official. It wasn't just an opinion. The post would say, today this is happening, or whatever. Well, this particular post on December 1st said, a bunch of laws are going into effect December 1st. Today, a new law takes effect that says you can't talk on your phone while driving. And it had a few more details, too, that sort of explained a bill that had been introduced but was not passed into law that said it's not just about talking on the phone, it's about holding your phone. So you still would have been allowed to talk on the phone if you have hands-free or earbuds or whatever. You just could not have your phone in your hand.
And again, just a bill.
Just a bill. It had not become law. And we, as part of this process, I reached out to the legislative leaders and said, hey, a lot of times you guys put one bill in a different bill that's going to pass. Is that what happened here? And they said, no, this has not become law. Well, it didn't matter. By the time we were already on this fact check, other news outlets had seen the Facebook post and thought it was legitimate. And so they did reports on it. And I don't want to mention any names because that's embarrassing. But it started to circulate on social media. And before long, if you Googled Hands-Free NC Act, which is the name of the bill, it would say in Google's AI-generated overview something to the effect of, the Hands-Free Act of 2025 went into law on December 1st, and it bans people from holding their phones while driving. And that just goes to show how you can go from one Facebook post that is inaccurate, gets picked up by, the traditional media, and then before long, Google tells you something that's completely wrong. That was one thing that got a lot of attention on our site.
You also get into more nuanced things, like one that you did about medical licenses. It's not really sexy, but it helped clarify some misinformation that seemed to be spreading. Tell us about that one.
Oh, man. That was a bill that passed in the summer unanimously. That means that that no one opposed it this summer. I forget the name of the bill, but it was basically, it enacted a number of reforms in the medical community. Josh Stein signed it. No one opposed it. Literally no one. But then it started going around social media and found opposition on Twitter, X as it's called now. And the bill, in order to get more doctors into rural parts of our state, it said that people from other countries could apply for what's called like an international medical license. And if they agreed to work in these rural parts of the state, they could apply for this license through the North Carolina Medical Board. Well, people claimed on social media that the bill didn't require applicants to take any U.S. exams at all.
For medical licenses. Right?
For medical licenses, right. Or do any training, they said in this one viral post. So we reached out to the North Carolina Medical Board and said, hey, I'm reading this thing. Other people are reading this bill, and it was 48 pages long. They're saying this. Is that right? And the medical board told us no. In order to get this license to practice, applicants would have to qualify for certification from a certain commission. And again, I don't have the name of it in front of me. But that commission required them to pass parts 1 and 2 of the 3-part U.S. medical licensing examination. So in the bill itself, It didn't specifically say, oh, you have to pass, this U.S. exam. And so I think that threw a lot of people off. But if you read the fine print as we did and as the North Carolina Medical Board did, you would see that if you qualify for this certification, then you would have to take certain parts of a U.S. medical exam. So we rated that claim mostly false. We do have to go into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. And, sometimes people look at our fact checks and they say, oh, why are you picking on this person or that person? I go into these topics with as much knowledge as a person on the street. With this one, I didn't know what the bill was going to say. And even after I read it, I was still not entirely sure. But in speaking to lawmakers and in speaking to the North Carolina Medical Board, it became clear that this wasn't entirely true, at least the claim.
What advice do you have for viewers and listeners and readers who probably consume a lot of statements like this that may or may not have any veracity?
Well, they're not going to want to hear this, but they're not going to want to hear this. But if you hear something in an ad that sounds controversial or false or like, wow, that stat sounds, high or low, Google it, and then see, don't just take the AI overview. Look down and see what news articles you can find that are from credible sources, whether it's WRAL or the local newspaper here, the News and Observer, or the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or The Economist, and see if they have anything on it. Don't take a politician's word for it because they're trying to convince you to vote for them. And in order to do that, oftentimes they stretch the truth to make something sound better or worse than it really is.
We've got a big election year coming in 2026. What are you going to be watching for?
Well, one thing that's happening now that wasn't happening in previous elections is that candidates and political parties are using artificial intelligence more than they ever used to. Now, we've seen some sampling, if you will, in recent elections, but I believe that's going to change, and we're going to see a lot more of that. In fact, there was one political group earlier this year that said, hey, we're going to use it. And hey, that's nice that they put out that disclaimer. We are going to use this. It'll be interesting to see if they included a disclaimer in their television ads or radio ads or whatever. That's something that I expect to see a lot of is perhaps an AI-generated visual ad that shows a politician doing something that they may not ever have done. And so people have to keep their eyes out and just watch television more skeptically and say, does this look right? And then if it doesn't, if it is AI, is this fair? And I know that puts even more of a burden on voters and viewers and listeners. But that's sort of the world we live in today, is that a lot of what we see is artificial. A lot of the claims in these political ads are exaggerated. So people are just going to have to do their homework, for lack of a better word, when they see these things that, raise their eyebrows or make their eyes pop out.
Going to be a very interesting and busy year, and I know that you're going to be continuing to do your work of keeping people honest. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
That's WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht. For his roundup of some of the year's most popular North Carolina fact checks, go to the PolitiFact's section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.